The ground gave way with a sound like a dying whisper, a low, impossible groan that seemed to originate from somewhere deeper than mere geological strata. Dr. Miranda Chen had explored countless archaeological sites across 6 continents, but nothing prepared her for the moment the Earth itself seemed to inhale and then collapse. Darkness consumed everything. For 3 heartbeats, absolute silence reigned. Then the dust began to settle, catching the dim light from their fallen equipment in strange, almost deliberate patterns. Miranda's hand instinctively reached for her tactical flashlight, her fingers finding it more by muscle memory than actual vision. When the beam cut through the darkness, it revealed something that made her breath catch in her throat. They hadn't fallen into a cavern. They had been welcomed. The chamber was perfectly symmetrical, impossibly so. Natural caves didn't form perfect dodecahedrons. The walls pulsed with a soft, crystalline light that seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that suggested something between mechanical precision and organic life. Embedded in the walls were structures that defied geological classification, not quite crystal, not quite metal, something that existed in a liminal space between mineral and technology. Everyone alive. Miranda's voice sounded small, swallowed by the vastness of the space. Weak affirmatives came from her team. Dr. Alejandro Rice, the team's geologist, was the first to stand. His usually immaculate khaki field outfit was now coated in a fine, iridescent dust that seemed to shimmer even in the minimal light. "This is impossible," he muttered, but his voice carried the excitement of a scientist confronting something truly extraordinary. At the chamber's center stood the artifact. It wasn't placed, it wasn't constructed. It simply existed. A crystalline structure that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. Approximately 2 meters tall, its surface was covered in glyphs that moved. Not metaphorically. The intricate symbols literally shifted and realigned when no one was looking directly at them, creating complex patterns that hinted at meaning just beyond comprehension. Miranda approached slowly, her professional caution battling with an almost childlike sense of wonder. Her equipment, the high-resolution cameras, the spectral analyzers, the radiation detectors, remained stubbornly inactive. It was as if they had entered a space where technology simply ceased to function. "No radio signals," called out Sarah Chen, their communications specialist. "No GPS. Nothing's transmitting. It's like we've been separated." Miranda finished the thought. Cut off. Isolated from everything they knew. The artifact pulsed. A soft, almost imperceptible rhythm that felt more like a heartbeat than any mechanical process. Miranda realized she was holding her breath, watching the glyphs dance at the edge of her perception. They reminded her of something: ancient petroglyphs, quantum mathematical equations, and something else, something older, much older. Alejandro's Geiger counter suddenly chirped to life, then immediately died. The brief moment of activity revealed radiation signatures that didn't match any known element. The dust on the floor began to arrange itself in intricate geometric patterns, almost like a living mosaic responding to some unheard command. They were not alone in this space, and yet they were completely isolated. Whatever brought them here was waiting, watching, evaluating. Alex Rodriguez felt invisible. Not literally, of course. But in the high-stakes world of xenolinguistics, he was perpetually on the margins. While Dr. Chen and the senior researchers examined the artifact, he was tasked with the mundane job of cataloging equipment and managing data backups. His fingers moved mechanically across the keyboard, each keystroke a reminder of his position at the bottom of the academic food chain. The artifact seemed to pulse, or was it a trick of the light? He hadn't meant to touch it. One moment, he was adjusting a sensor near the base of the crystalline structure. The next, his fingertips brushed against its surface, a surface that felt impossibly smooth, yet alive with an energy that defied description. A sensation like an electrical current, but softer, more intimate. Then the world changed. Words erupted from his mouth. Not words in any language he knew. Not English, not Spanish, not the dozen linguistic fragments he'd studied over years of research. These were sounds that seemed to originate from somewhere deeper than memory. Sounds that carried weight, meaning, entire universes of context. The research team froze. Sarah's recording equipment, which had been dead moments before, suddenly sparked to life. Meters flickered. Lights danced across screens in patterns that suggested complex data transmission. But no one was watching the equipment. All eyes were on Alex. His body was rigid, eyes rolled back, mouth moving with a precision and fluency that suggested decades of study. But the words were coming from somewhere else. Somewhere beyond. Karathlin Mixtal Voronka, he intoned, each syllable perfectly articulated, resonating with a depth that seemed to vibrate the very air around them. Zelnera Koth Imperium Valkar. Dr. Chen approached cautiously. Alex, can you hear me? No response, just that relentless, beautiful language pouring forth. When it ended, Alex collapsed. The room remained suspended in shocked silence. It was Dr. Reyes who broke the spell. Run the translation analysis, he demanded, his voice a mixture of scientific excitement and barely contained fear. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. The linguistic analysis software, a complex system designed to parse and decode unknown languages, began its work. Normally, such an analysis would take weeks, sometimes months. It completed in 37 seconds. The results were impossible. The language Alex spoke was a perfect match to fragmented inscriptions found in archaeological sites across 3 continents, sites separated by thousands of miles and hundreds of years. Inscriptions that had confounded linguists for decades. Texts found on stone tablets in the Atacama Desert. Engravings on metal fragments discovered in Siberian permafrost. Partial translations from ceramic shards in the mountains of Peru. Each fragment now made sense. Each fragment was a piece of a larger narrative that suggested something profound. Humanity was not alone. Had never been alone. And something was waiting to be remembered. Alex stirred. Confusion etched across his face. What happened? No one answered. The recording continued to play, those alien words filling the room with a promise and a warning. Something had awakened. The first black SUVs arrived exactly 17 minutes after the first encrypted communication. Dr. Miranda Chen knew something was wrong the moment she saw them. These weren't standard research support vehicles. The windows were too dark. The license plates too generic. The men who emerged moved with a precision that screamed military, not academic. Everyone stay calm, she muttered, more to herself than to her team. The lead agent was a woman. Mid-40s, razor-sharp cheekbones, eyes that had seen too much. She carried no visible weapon, but her posture suggested she didn't need one. Her credentials identified her as Agent Alina Kovacs, but Miranda knew that was likely just another layer of misdirection. Dr. Chen, the woman said. Not a question. A statement. Before Miranda could respond, Agent Kovacs was already moving. Her team swept through the research site with a choreographed efficiency that suggested years of practiced operations. They weren't collecting evidence. They were collecting everything. Laptops, notebooks, sensor readings, even the dust samples. This is unauthorized, Miranda protested, her academic indignation momentarily overriding her survival instinct. Agent Kovacs didn't even look at her, everything related to the artifact. Now. But Miranda had prepared for this moment. Not consciously, perhaps, but years of working in sensitive archaeological research had taught her one fundamental lesson. Always have a backup. Her encrypted drive was already safely hidden. Not in a computer. Not in a safe. Somewhere far more unexpected. As the team worked, Miranda noticed something odd. The agents weren't just collecting data. They were actively destroying certain files, specific files, with a selectivity that suggested they knew exactly what they were looking for. Alex Rodriguez sat in the corner, still shaken from his linguistic episode. The young researcher looked lost, a specimen being processed rather than a human being. An encrypted communication device on Agent Kovac's hip chirped. The woman's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. A micro-expression that suggested whatever was being communicated was both extraordinary and terrifying. "We're done here," she announced suddenly. But they weren't. Hidden in a secure server thousands of miles away, a data cache was already uploading. Fragments of information that Agent Kovacs and her team had no idea existed. A breadcrumb trail of a conspiracy that stretched back decades. Miranda had learned long ago that in the world of archaeological research, information was the most dangerous weapon. The team packed up. The artifact's location was scrubbed from every official record. But Miranda had already photographed the critical details. The specific geometric patterns, the shifting glyphs, the impossible symmetry. Something was awakening, and no amount of government intervention could stop it. As the last SUV pulled away, a single encrypted message began its journey through global communication networks. Not a warning, not a threat, a single line of text that would change everything. They're remembering. The first sign came from the Nenets, deep in the Yamal Peninsula of Siberia, where temperatures plunged to -40 and civilization existed only as a distant whisper. The indigenous reindeer herders noticed something was wrong. Not with the land, not with the animals, with themselves. It started with dreams. Collective dreams that seemed to flow between members of the small community like a shared consciousness. Intricate geometric patterns appeared in the snow, perfectly symmetrical, created by no human hand. Children began drawing complex mathematical equations they could not possibly understand. Elders spoke in a language that was neither Russian nor their native Nenets dialect, a language that seemed to pulse with an ancient living energy. Simultaneously, on the other side of the planet, similar phenomena began to occur. In the Atacama Desert, astronomical observatories reported impossible readings. Alien observation vessels, which had maintained a careful, almost scientific distance from Earth for centuries, suddenly became active. Their movements defied current understanding of propulsion. They didn't move like ships. They moved like thoughts, appearing and disappearing in locations that should have been impossible to reach. Dr. Miranda Chen watched the first satellite images with a mixture of scientific skepticism and growing dread. The vessels weren't weapons platforms. They weren't invasion ships. They were something else entirely. Observers, collectors, evaluators. Communication channels erupted into a frenzy of encrypted transmissions. Military installations across the globe went into lockdown. But this wasn't a traditional threat. This was something far more complex. In remote regions across the planet, indigenous populations began exhibiting extraordinary behaviors. A group of Aboriginal elders in Western Australia began constructing massive ground drawings that, when viewed from satellite, formed perfect quantum mathematical models. Amazonian tribes created intricate ritual spaces that aligned with complex astronomical calculations predating known human civilization. The patterns were consistent. The connections were undeniable. Something was happening to humanity. Not to specific regions, not to select groups, to the entire species. Satellite imagery captured strange atmospheric phenomena. Auroras appeared in regions where they should have been impossible. Electromagnetic disturbances created patterns that suggested intelligent design. Radio telescopes picked up signals that were neither random noise nor traditional communication. They were structured, meaningful. Alex Rodriguez, still recovering from his linguistic episode, noticed something else. The glyphs he had spoken, the ones that had erupted from him in the research facility, were now appearing in the most unexpected places. Crop circles in European wheat fields, sand drawings in the Sahara, petroglyphs emerging in glacial ice in Greenland. They weren't random. They were a message, an invitation. As night fell across the planet, something fundamental was changing. Humanity was being evaluated, assessed, prepared for something that had been waiting, perhaps for millions of years. And no one knew why. The genetic lab looked like a war zone. Shattered computer screens, scattered data printouts, a single red alert light pulsing in the corner like an accusatory eye. Dr. Elena Roskov stared at the genetic sequencing results, her hands trembling. Alex Rodriguez's DNA was impossible. Not just unusual. Not merely anomalous. Impossible. The genetic markers shifted, actually shifted, like living information that rearranged itself between observations. One moment, a sequence would show standard human DNA. The next, it would transform into something that defied every known principle of genetic science. "This can't be real," she muttered, running the analysis for the 17th time. A classified message arrived. Encrypted. Top secret clearance. The kind of communication that made careers disappear. "Quarantine Protocol Omega initiated," it read. "All genetic research on subject A12 to be immediately classified. Extreme prejudice authorized." Elena knew what that meant. Someone was going to make this discovery disappear. Permanently. She made her backup copies quickly. The genetic anomalies were extraordinary. Fragments of DNA that seemed to carry information from multiple sources. Not just human. Not just terrestrial. Something older. Much older. Genetic code that suggested a complex design. A living library of information that had been carefully constructed over millennia. Scattered throughout Alex's genetic sequence were markers that resembled nothing in any known biological database. Some sequences showed similarities to extinct species. Others contained information that seemed more like complex mathematical algorithms than biological instructions. It was as if humanity was a carefully designed repository. A living, breathing archive of something far more complex than a simple evolutionary accident. A hidden message emerged in the genetic code. Not in the traditional sense of genetic instruction, but in the spaces between. A complex linguistic pattern that suggested intentional design. Like a message written between the lines of reality itself. The phone rang. Blocked number. "Dr. Roskov," a voice said. Not a question. A statement. "Who is this?" she responded. A soft chuckle. "Someone who knows you've discovered something you were never meant to understand." The line went dead. Her computer screen flickered. Data began to stream. Genetic sequences from around the world. Not just from Alex. From seemingly random individuals. Children. Elderly people. Individuals from completely different genetic backgrounds. A pattern emerged. The genetic transformations were spreading. Not through infection. Not through traditional genetic mutation. Something else. Something that suggested a coordinated, intentional process of genetic awakening. Humanity was changing. And no one knew why, or who was behind it. In the corner of the lab, a single genetic sample continued to shift and change, its DNA rearranging itself like a living puzzle, waiting to be solved. The first child solved a quantum mechanics equation in finger paint. Emma Rodriguez, no relation to Alex, was just 5 years old when she covered her bedroom wall with a mathematical proof that would have made Nobel laureates weep. Her parents thought it was a creative drawing until Dr. Miranda Chen arrived. The global transformation was no longer subtle. Children across the planet began displaying capabilities that defied every understanding of human potential. In Tokyo, a 7-year-old composed a musical piece that contained mathematical harmonies suggesting multidimensional structures. In Buenos Aires, twin siblings created architectural designs that incorporated principles of quantum entanglement into physical space. It wasn't just children. Artists began creating works that seemed to carry information beyond visual or auditory perception. A street painter in New Delhi produced murals that, when analyzed, contained complex computational algorithms. Musicians composed pieces that triggered specific neurological responses, healing frequencies that seemed to repair cellular damage. The world's top research institutions were in chaos. "This isn't evolution," Dr. Chen explained during an emergency global conference. "This is activation. Something is turning on dormant capabilities within human DNA. The conference was virtual, but no one knew exactly who was truly watching. Encrypted channels buzzed with increasingly bizarre reports. Mathematicians were solving centuries-old problems in minutes. Physicists were describing universal principles that challenged everything known about quantum mechanics. Humanity was becoming something else. Not through technology, not through external modification. Something was awakening from within. Indigenous knowledge keepers reported the most profound changes. Aboriginal elders in Australia began performing healing rituals that manipulated quantum fields. Inuit shamans demonstrated communication techniques that suggested an understanding of consciousness beyond individual perception. Alex Rodriguez, the initial catalyst, found himself at the center of a growing network of transformed individuals. He could now perceive linguistic patterns in everything, in natural sounds, in mathematical equations, in the very fabric of reality itself. Governments worldwide implemented strict control protocols. But it was too late. The transformation was spreading faster than any containment strategy could manage. Satellite imagery began capturing strange atmospheric phenomena. Electromagnetic fields around certain human gatherings showed complex, intelligent patterns. It was as if humanity was becoming a collective neural network, individual, yet interconnected. Dr. Elena Ruskov's genetic research revealed the most shocking discovery. These changes weren't random. They were following a precise, predetermined pattern. Like a complex software update being simultaneously installed across millions of devices. We're not evolving, she told her most trusted colleagues. We're remembering. The glyphs that first appeared on the mysterious artifact now appeared everywhere. In mathematical equations, in artistic expressions, in the way children played, in the dreams of people across continents. Something was calling humanity home, and no one knew exactly what that meant. As night fell across the planet, millions of people simultaneously experienced a moment of perfect, inexplicable clarity, a sensation of belonging to something far greater than themselves. The awakening had begun. The first diplomatic vessel appeared without warning. Not with weapons, not with threats, simply appeared in Earth's orbit like a thought made manifest. Global defense systems went into immediate alert. Military installations worldwide locked down. But something was different this time. The vessel didn't move like a ship. It moved like a living consciousness. Inside United Nations Emergency Headquarters, Dr. Miranda Chen stood before a collection of world leaders, her presentation displaying impossible data, satellite imagery, genetic analyses, linguistic patterns, a story that suggested humanity was never truly alone. We're not being invaded, she explained, her voice steady. We're being evaluated. The alien diplomatic transmission came simultaneously to every communication channel on the planet. Not in any human language. Not in a single language at all. It was a multi-dimensional communication that seemed to bypass traditional linguistic barriers. Are you ready to remember? The message carried weight, meaning, an entire universe of context that resonated differently with each individual who perceived it. In remote research facilities, in classified government bunkers, in ordinary living rooms across the globe, people began to experience something unprecedented. Collective memories, fragmented but profound understanding of a history that predated human civilization by millions of years. Alex Rodriguez found himself at the epicenter of this cosmic revelation. The linguistic patterns he had first spoken in the research facility now made complete sense. They weren't just a language. They were a key, a complex communication protocol that bridged multiple civilizations. Diplomatic vessels from multiple alien civilizations entered Earth's orbit, not as a unified force, but as individual observers, each with its own perspective, its own understanding of the unfolding event. Some saw humanity as a potential threat. Some saw humanity as a long-lost repository of information. Some saw humanity as something far more complex. Indigenous cultures worldwide reported the most profound experiences. Australian Aboriginal elders spoke of remembering the star time. Inuit shamans described an awakening of the collective memory. Amazonian tribes created complex ritual spaces that aligned with astronomical calculations predating known human civilization. The transformation was no longer subtle. Entire cities experienced moments of collective consciousness. Mathematical prodigies solved century-old scientific mysteries in hours. Artists created works that contained multi-dimensional information. Musicians composed pieces that triggered specific neurological responses. Dr. Elena Ruskov's genetic research revealed the most shocking discovery. These changes weren't random. They were following a precise, predetermined pattern. Like a complex software update being simultaneously installed across millions of devices. "We're not just evolving," she told her most trusted colleagues. "We're being activated." The alien vessels didn't communicate through traditional means. They communicated through a complex quantum resonance that seemed to bypass traditional communication barriers. Information flowed not through words, but through a kind of shared consciousness. Humanity was being invited to something. A conversation millions of years in the making, and no one knew exactly what that meant. As the diplomatic vessels continued their silent observation, one thing became clear. Everything was about to change. Silence fell across the planet. Not an absence of sound, but a profound moment of collective understanding that transcended language, culture, and individual experience. Alex Rodriguez stood at the epicenter of human transformation, his body vibrating with a frequency that connected him to something far beyond human comprehension. The crystalline artifact from the original discovery now hovered above the United Nations Assembly Hall, casting light that seemed to contain entire universes of information. "We are the Guardians." The multi-dimensional communication began. Not a voice, not a language. A pure transmission of understanding that resonated simultaneously in every human consciousness. Millions of years ago, a civilization far beyond human understanding had initiated a grand experiment. Humanity was not an accident of evolution. They were a carefully designed repository, a living library engineered to carry forward a legacy so complex that even its original creators had lost full comprehension. Genetic memories began to unfold. Fragments of cosmic history cascaded through human consciousness. Civilizations that had risen and fallen across galaxies. Quantum technologies that manipulated the very fabric of reality. Philosophical understanding that bridged individual consciousness with universal intelligence. Dr. Miranda Chen watched as the transformation completed itself. It wasn't destruction. It wasn't conquest. It was an awakening. Humanity was being invited to join a cosmic conversation millions of years in the making. The alien diplomatic vessels were not ships in the traditional sense. They were living consciousness networks, repositories of collective knowledge that had been observing, waiting, preparing for this moment of activation. Indigenous cultures had always known. Their myths, their sacred traditions, their deep connection to the natural world. These were not primitive beliefs. They were fragmented memories of a much larger truth. Alex could now see the linguistic patterns that connected everything. Mathematical equations were languages. Musical compositions were complex communication protocols. The very fabric of reality was a multi-dimensional conversation waiting to be understood. "You are not alone," the transmission continued. "You never were." Cities transformed. Scientific understanding exploded. Technological limitations became meaningless as human consciousness expanded. The boundaries between individual and collective, between species, between dimensions, all began to dissolve. Dr. Elena Ruskov's genetic research revealed the final piece. Humanity was a carefully designed bridge, a species engineered to connect multiple civilizations, to carry forward a legacy that transcended individual existence. The transformation was not an invasion. It was an invitation to remember, an invitation to understand, an invitation to become something more. As the final wave of activation passed, humanity stood at the threshold of a new understanding. They were not just observers of the universe. They were participants in a cosmic conversation millions of years in the making. The crystalline artifact dissolved, its information dispersing into the collective human consciousness. Something had awakened, and nothing would ever be the same again.